General, how the war in Europe can start?
Well, the biggest risk to a conflict is a miscalculation by Russia that NATO will not respond or that we cannot move fast enough to prevent them. If they believe that they can move faster than us in all domains, then I think there is a risk that they would take a shot.
How real is the prospect of the Crimean scenario of Russian annexation of Belarus?
I don't know how real that possibility is. Certainly, it appears to me that Belarus has attempted to push back on Russia, to not allow permanent basing so far, even though Russia would very much like to do that. But of course, at the end of the day, Belarus is so dependent on Russian economy and Russian energy sources. They're in a very difficult position. I think the West should be doing everything we can to bolster Belarus, to support efforts at democracy and market economy, to give them an option other than total suppression by Russia. This is important for Poland and Lithuania, but it's also important for Ukraine. Belarus has told Ukraine that they would not let Russians invade Ukraine through Belarus. So this is important for a broader region.
Some experts said, and we see that the neighboring countries, Russian neighbors, when they start to move out of Russian influence, as Georgia or Ukraine, the answer of Kremlin is aggression. Can we imagine in the future if Belarus will choose the democratic changes? Does it open the door for Russian green men to enter Belarus?
Russia's security depends on insecurity around its periphery. I mean, the last thing that Russia wants are a series of nations that are free, good economy, people are able to make choices, and they have rising economic prosperity. Russia does not want that on their border because then their own people begin to realize, why is life so much better in Poland? Why is life so much better in Lithuania? Why is life so much better in Georgia? So Russia, of course, does not want that to happen. But this is not the the 19th or 18th century where great powers have games with trading away sovereignty of other countries for their own benefit. This is in modern times, nations get to choose, and so the people of Belarus get to choose what kind of government they want to have, what kind of economy they want to have, and their orientation. And I think the West ought to continue supporting those efforts while respecting Russian sovereignty, but not accepting Russia's disrespect for the sovereignty of its neighbors.
United States and Belarus have very limited diplomatic relations, unfortunately. What about you as one of the directors of SIPA? Which sources do you use to find information about what's going on in Belarus in the field of security?
Well, you're exactly right that we don't know a lot about what goes on inside Belarus, but I'm hoping that this will change in the coming months. There's, I think, more and more people are realizing that Belarus, that many people there are looking westward. I mean, on any given weekend, there are thousands of men and women from Belarus who are in Vilnius shopping. I mean, so they can feel how much better life is in a free, democratic market economy. But they are still under such intensive pressure. I am anxious to go there myself. Hopefully, in the very near future, I'll have an opportunity to understand better what the dynamics are. I have had some opportunities to speak with men and women of Belarus, to include ambassadors, and they were anxious to talk about Zapad, for example. that, they were the ones that called for transparency, not the Russian Federation.
If we're talking about this hypothetical annexion, Russian annexation, because we are talking a lot about it now in Belarus, what could be United States' reaction to the annexation of Belarus by Russia?
Well, of course, I could not speculate on how the United States might react. I would imagine that, and this is hypothetical. I mean, I have no special insight that Russia plans to do this. I certainly hope that they do not do that. That would be a really significant and unnecessary escalation of tensions. Russia would have everything to lose. It would be impossible for Western countries to deal economically with Russia. I would hope if Russia were to violate sovereignty of another nation the way they did in Ukraine, and the European Union put sanctions in place. If Russia was dismissive of that and then annexed or invaded another country, how could the world international community just sort of stand by? The risk is that Russia might believe that people might not actually do something about that. So it's important that the European Union and other international bodies, continue to make it clear this is unacceptable to use force, changing borders, sovereign borders of European nations.
Question about the U.S. base in Poland. One of the Belarusian opposition leaders, Mykolai Statkevich, a former military man, colonel, is opposed to the U.S. base in Poland. He believes that it will give a reason for the Kremlin to deploy its military base in Belarus. Statkevich offers U.S. and Poland not to deploy the American base until the Russians put their base in Belarus. According to him, according to Statkevich, the possibility of expanding the U.S. presence in Poland will deter the Kremlin from placing its base in Belarus. How would you respond to such a proposal?
Well, Poland, a terrific ally. They've done everything that an ally should do in terms of their own defense, modernization, continuing to improve quality of their military capabilities, cooperation, providing leadership. And this offer of Poland to the United States is another example of a good ally that's willing to invest in deterrence. Having said that, I think it's important that the United States take all things into consideration. As you may know, the U.S. Congress passed in their latest Defense Authorization Act, which is now law, a requirement for the Department of Defense to conduct a study of this offer. And the Department of Defense has to give its report by no later than 1 March 2019, so about 5.5 months from now. And in the law, it specifies that the department's study must take into account the impact on NATO, and this is the key. What is the impact on the cohesion of our alliance of putting a permanent base in Poland? For sure, Russia will respond. And my record, I think, is very clear. I'm not scared of a provocation of Russia. But the fact is, all of our allies will have to deal with the consequences. Whatever that response may be, all of our allies will have to deal with it. And so I think it's important that the United States do the diplomatic work with all of the allies to bring them along, to make the case, if this is the right thing to do. It will be so much more powerful if you have all of the alliance in support of this, similar to the very important historic step that was taken right here in Warsaw in 2016 at the NATO summit, with the decision by all 28 nations at the time of NATO to deploy EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Groups, into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. That was so powerful, and we barely heard a peep out of Russia because you had the entire alliance together.
But Warsaw said it's not enough to defend Poland.
But my point is, what is the cohesion of the alliance that guarantees everybody's security? And so maintaining the cohesion of the alliance is critical. So this study that the Department of Defense will do is required to take into account impact on the alliance. I think that's the right strategic thing to do. Now, they may determine that, yes, this will move forward, and then there are practical things to work on. But preserving the cohesion of our alliance is always going to be in the front of my mind to guarantee everybody's security. There are, on any given day, more than 1,000 American soldiers in Poland already. Rotational forces, logisticians, rotational armor, aviation, headquarters. Soon we'll have missile defense. So there is already a very strong U.S. presence in Poland on a rotational basis. I understand why people want to have a permanent structure, and I think there are probably ways that we can address this to give improved sense of security, but also without creating consequences that all of our allies would be forced to deal with unless we went in together.
You said that soon we'll have the anti-missile defense here. When we can expect it? You mean Polish?
So, as you know, a few years ago, the United States made the decision with our allies, Romania and Poland, to place what we call Aegis ashore. These are naval missile defense systems that are going to be based on the ground instead of on a ship in Romania and Poland. And these were put there, are being put there, to protect allies against missile launches out of Iran. So they're not adequate by themselves to, if there was a serious missile strike from Russia, I mean, just the math and the physics, these two Aegis systems, they're clearly not put there to counter a Russian threat. But nonetheless, they still represent a significant investment by the United States.
How do you feel about the military simulation presented by Defense 24? I hope you heard about it. It was simulation articulated in Poland a few weeks ago, where Russia could attack Poland via Belarus in perspective of 10 years. I mean, using Belarusian terrain, but not Belarusian army, but Russian army.
Well, certainly, this is why Belarus is so important for all of us. It's in a place that touches multiple NATO countries, as well as our friend Ukraine, and this is why they're under such pressure from Russia. The likelihood of an attack like this, I don't know what that likelihood is. I do know that the more prepared we are, the more united and cohesive the alliance is, the less likely it is that Russia will ever make that terrible miscalculation.
Mm-hmm. The question a little bit about history. Did the U.S. consider the prospect of the accession of Belarus to NATO at the beginning of the 90s, after Soviet Union were collapsed? What do you think, how relevant this prospect is now?
I've never heard that Belarus wants to be a part of NATO or EU. I mean, obviously Russia absolutely does not want that, but I think that it is in the long-term interest of Belarus to figure out how to unleash the talent of their young people in a free and open society.
The question about so-called Belarusian nuclear plant built in cooperation with Russia. I mean, Ostrovets nuclear plant close to Vilnius. What do you think about it? Is it danger to Lithuania as a NATO country, or it's just economic, another nuclear plant? And
well, the danger is, of course, if you're not entirely sure of the safety, the professional engineering safety of it, there's a danger there. The other part that would concern me is you could envision a scenario where there was an accident and then Russia had to come in, as they've done before, the pretense of humanitarian purposes have to come in and with military force to secure an area or do something, and then they've changed the facts on the ground. So I think the neighbors are wise to pay attention to this. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but I think everybody, of course, should watch it closely.